All right, you ready? Did you enjoy the morning?
Yeah.
Welcome back. If you're just arriving, welcome. I have just a few announcements. Sorry, getting my bearings here. Okay, well, I'm really excited for our 3 afternoon speakers. We will hear from Ingrid Pierre, Maria Marquis, and Eniola Oluwole. And we'll do that back to back. And then afterwards, a couple of volunteers have organized an unofficial after party at Beat Brew Hall in Harvard Square. So everyone is welcome to join us there. So a few announcements. First, I'm going to read the winners of the raffle. So what we'll do is I'll read the names in order, and it'll be just the first person who to be read gets their pick of the prizes, and then we'll go from there. And if anybody doesn't come up, give you one chance later, and then we'll redraw. So the prizes are 4 books by Abby Covert, Heather Hedden, Maria Marquis, and Tanya Schroeder. And from our global sponsors, there's one license, I think year-long license of Axure RP, a $100 coupon from Rosenfeld Media, 3 free copies of Understanding by Richard Saul Werman, provided by the Understanding Group. So if you were at the event last year, we had Richard Saul Werman as a speaker, as well as Dan Klein, who co-leads the Understanding Group. And I think there's a free book for everyone in the online swag bag. You just have to pay for shipping. But we have 3 free books, including free shipping. And then the last one is a 6-month license of UXpressia. Okay, so here are the names. And I apologize if I mispronounce anyone. Number 1, Kayla McCauley. Number 2, Jeremy Beaudry. 3, Meredith Warner. Oh, and as if you hear your name, go up to the corner there. Meet Jason, and we'll sort everything out. Three was Meredith Warner. 4, Vincent Anais. 5, Lana Ducharme. Number 6, Rachel Weiheimer. 7, Satya Adebala. 8, Alex Lawflood. 9, Renee Dubuc. 10, Kelsey Poinsot Jones. 11, sorry, I don't know how to pronounce it, Juhi Hans. And 12 is Christine Bridges. So, congratulations, everyone. Could you just hand them the list? Thanks. All right, while they're doing that, so again, I'll mention the, so these are the coupons and giveaways for everyone. I'll email this link out after the event. So I want to thank all of the volunteers who have been helping all day. They've been working the whole day to make this event go smoothly, and I think everything has gone really smoothly. Thank you to Todd and Nick, who have been helping with the live stream and video. Thank you to Angelica, helping with video. Who else? Everyone who's been in the rooms, running mics, standing by, offering help at the registration desk. Thank you for all your help today. I also want to mention that 2 of our sponsors are out here with tables. CVS Health is hiring. They wanted me to let you know that there are 2 different websites that you have to go to see their job postings. But for more information, you can stop by at the table and get Mindy's email address and reach out to them. And then, of course, Northeastern University is also sitting out there. So please say hi to them and thank them. And I'll come back to the list of other sponsors at the end. So as I just said, you can see how this is. This event relies completely on volunteers, and this is a community-driven event. It does not happen without people stepping up to take ownership and say, this is important to us. This is important to the community, and we want to keep it going. This is our 5th year doing it, and out of those 5 years, more than 1 year has come close to not happening. Every year we need to find new volunteers, new sponsors, bring back our current, loyal existing sponsors, and especially have new organizers, because it is a lot of work, and we need to continually involve more people and pass it on. So if this event had a big impact on you, please think about this. I don't know who will organize the event next year, but we're looking for organizers and volunteers, so please get in touch if that interests you. I think that's all I had for now. It looks like everybody's back in the room. So I would now like to introduce Ingrid Pierre. And I'll introduce you as you come and set up.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? I'm all mic'd up. Thank you so much for coming.
Do you want me to read a quick introduction?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I'm very excited for this talk. Ingrid Pierre is currently the principal UX designer at the MBTA's Customer Technology Department, where she leads the design of MBTA.com and of Skate, which is a digital tool used by field staff for bus dispatching. So I think all of us in Boston have used or benefited from this work. Having come to the transportation space from Boston-based startups, Ingrid's work focuses on helping both riders and operational staff manage the complexity of the MBTA's transit network. Thank you, Ingrid.
Sure. Can you help me?
Sure.
Let's start this way.
Sometimes it takes a minute.
Sorry about that. But thank you guys so much for coming out today. The last time I told a crowd of people that I worked for the T, I got booed. So my standards are pretty low. But I'm really glad that you're here. And I'm so excited to talk to you all about this work. You can't see it yet because we're still trying to get it up. But the title of this talk is called Redesigning Schedules, How Bias Makes You Late, which is potentially a very provocative title. I'm trying not to get fired. But yeah, so I'm the principal UX designer at the T's Customer Technology Department. And I've been designing consumer apps for about 7 years and at the T for about 2. And I just name dropped my department, which is the Customer Technology Department. You might not have ever heard of us, which is fine, because we're pretty new. We were formed in 2015 after the snowpocalypse wiped out the city, and the government and the board decided to reinvest in something really important to how service runs, which is basically software. And in addition to a ton of things behind the scenes, we have countdown clocks, screens, mbta.com, which you might be familiar with, plus all the data and the APIs and all of that, which feeds out into other things that you're probably also using. But today I'm just going to talk to you about kind of the flagship or the first product that CTD tackled after 2015, which is a redesign of mbta.com. And in 2015, mbta.com looked like that top screen, and it looked like that top screen on your mobile phone. So there was a lot of work to do. It was a super rich website with a ton of tooling and a ton of public features, but it needed to be A, accessible, and B, responsive on different devices. So what you see on the lower side is what mbta.com kind of looks like today, and so that you know where I'm situated in that, I came somewhere halfway through that redesign, and I joined the team in 2018. And the part of the redesign that I want to talk most about is probably the part of this website that most people interact with, which is our schedules data. And I think I need to do just like a little brief explainer about what a schedule is before we can get into it. So what is a schedule? The best way I can describe what a schedule is what ought to happen, right? And what ought to happen is actually really different depending on who you talk to. Internally, what ought to happen is this like sort of messy but beautiful, amazing confluence of things that happens between planning and operations. And planning routes is driven by geography, history, politics, as messy as it gets, and operations, which is like very finite, right? We have at peak service, so rush hour, we have 5 dispatchers sitting in rooms like this one, and 800 active buses plus all their operators going on and off shift, and over 170 plus bus routes. But to the public, a public schedule is much simpler. It's just like what won't make me late to where I need to be. And creating that translation turns out really hard. So to give you an idea of why it's hard, this is what's called the rectograph. And this is how our operations staff understand the delivery of service or the schedule. So the top piece is what a person's day looks like, all the trips they take in the different shifts, when they clock out, how much they get paid. And then that second piece is how that shift fits in context with all the other people that interact with a single bus. So as you see this, you'd like, don't spend too much time on it. Even people who look at this all the time need a cheat sheet. It's utterly inscrutable. But the interesting thing is like this is what underlies all of our trip data. This information is what powers the technology in our system. And if you wonder what a rectograph was, because I've never heard that word before, it comes from like an ancient, well, like pre-World War I photocopy machine. And I'd like to say we're not using this anymore, but I mean, it's just the modern Xerox, and we definitely are distributing paper schedules to our operations staff. And likewise, public schedules in the last 100 years are more or less the same. It's like this time-tested format of a list of stops and a list of times. And this is something that people still in the system rely upon. We still publish these PDFs. You'll see them throughout stations. And if you're lucky enough to have nice people in your neighborhood, they might post them on your bus stop. But in the last 10 years, this has really changed a ton. And the idea of what ought to happen, or what a public schedule looks like has really changed. So on the left, you're seeing the countdown clocks that we run. There's relatively new. You're seeing also this yellow strip that you're seeing is a solar-powered e-ink sign, which is totally new. Our department is actually piloting at a few different stops throughout the city. These will go live on Monday, if you've seen some of these polls go in. And then, like I said, the data that we create has also fed apps that you're familiar with, like Google Maps and Transit. I just have to stop here because I know that someone in the audience is going to quibble over like schedule. There is a difference internally, like between a schedule and a prediction. A scheduled time being 4:45, the bus comes Monday through Friday, and a prediction being the bus is coming in 2 minutes. But for members of the public, or like even myself, it doesn't really matter. Whatever you told me is what I expect, and therefore that's the schedule. That's what ought to happen. The second piece of my title is How Bias Makes You Late. And I think it's important to kind of stop and say, what exactly do I mean by bias? And I think it's not possible to enter this talk without talking about how the city that we've inherited. So we've inherited a city that has been formed and shaped by systemic historical biases. And these can be benign to insidious, and they're, at the front and back of my mind when I'm thinking about the work that we do and the things that we want to solve for at the T. And if you don't have a baseline on this bias, I think you're going to have a bad time at this talk. I'm sorry. And also you're going to have a bad time because I'm not going to dig into these too much, because as a designer, these are things that I have to work against, but it's not something I can necessarily enact change on. So the biases that we're going to talk about here, explained very subtly by this Liz Climo comic, are kind of unconscious biases. Is this an IA element? I don't know. But it's something that affects our work as designers and practitioners, often without us realizing it. And I wanted to talk about how that has raised its head in the work that we've been doing online to change up these schedules. So again, what does bias have to do with a timetable? A timetable seems like it should be a perfectly rational thing. It's a list of stops and a list of times. It should not necessarily have a mind of its own or biases that interact with it. But for me, I think our inability to communicate what ought to happen or what the schedule should be makes it extremely difficult for people to rely upon our service. And it's just very clear that that effect is not equally spread throughout the system. So a question that you can maybe answer in your head is, what mode of transit has had the least reliable service in the system? And for that, we'll need to flash back to 2018, when Beyonce was ruling Coachella, and a little few months after I had joined the T. So a few months after I had joined the T, this is what reliability looked like for the bus. It was 69% reliable. Compare that to subway at 89% and commuter rail at 91%. This is really damning, but this is the numbers. And if you guys want to know what reliability means, you can go to mbtaontrack.com and dig into it more there. But this is something that I knew going into the T. And the thing about the bus is there's a sort of sad combination of both poor reliability and poor accuracy. So I think I need to pause and say, if something is extremely unreliable, it is that much more important that we can tell you when to expect it, or how unreliable is it going to be. And if we can't be accurate about how unreliable we are, you're going to have that much worse of a time, and these kind of effects multiply against each other. So when I joined the T, the product was mostly, the new website was mostly done. And the team was comprised of a number of developers, content writers, designers like myself. And they felt like what they had done was working, and working well. And I wanted to probe on that. It was is it? Because there's a lot of things that people are unhappy about. But what I found when I did this audit, and so these are stats that were collected from a kind of passive, anonymous session collecting that we do on mbta.com. So what I found was that the inequity that was seen in the reliability of the system was also presenting itself in people's actual experiences of the website. In other customer apps, you want people to spend more time on there and click around. But for us as the T, we just want you to get in, get the information you need, and bounce right out. And that was absolutely not happening for people on the bus, which was, combined with subway, a far bigger chunk of ridership. So that brings me to our first bias. It's not the fault of anyone who worked with me that they were commuters, and they have certain biases about the way they travel. And they were not only just commuters, but they were commuters primarily doing just a couple trips a day, on the bus, or no, on the subway and commuter rail, primarily. And that thing that I'm calling the commuter bias of this team, of our original website even, is kind of like exemplified by our friend Charlie here, right? Charlie does not necessarily represent the totality of Boston or people riding the trains and buses. In fact, like if you think about how people ride the system off-peak hours, there's all kinds of patterns that people take. Caretakers, women, people of color, the elderly, people of lower socioeconomic status. Those people ride the system in much more complex ways. It takes them longer to get around. It's more difficult to find places where you can have access and get around. And so this was a bias that I just really wanted to stomp out with our designs, but I also really wanted to investigate how that had affected the work that we had done on the website so far. Sorry, this is kind of small, but I'm hoping you can see. On the left is what a commuter rail schedule looked like in 2018. On the right is what a bus schedule looked like in 2018. And as you can see, it really only took website users one click to see something that looks like a schedule, or like what ought to happen. So you see the stops and list of times. On the right, this is a kind of complex bus route. It's Route 39. There's no times to be seen. And in the longest semi-direct path to schedules, it would take a user maybe 7 clicks to see something that resembled a schedule. So after this audit, one of the first things we decided to do was like, okay, let's shorten that path. Let's make the first impression just have some times on it. So a thing that you know if you take the bus is there's not that many countdown clocks. Well, there would be some on Monday, but this was a way that we could put countdown clocks inside your pocket so that if you were looking at this line diagram, you could see immediately when you can expect the next bus is. And this, to me, is a form of a schedule. In order to explain this one, I might need to turn over. So the commuter bias is also kind of insidious too, because commuters sometimes have extremely simple paths, especially commuter rail or anything on fixed rail. But buses can do some pretty wacky things because they travel in traffic, on the roads. They do different things at different times. And this, for example, is what the 57 does occasionally. The black is what it's supposed to do most of the time. And it's really hard to get a schedule if you don't know where your bus is going. And this is what we were grading people who needed the bus with as a control. So this controlled that list of stops that I showed you earlier. I'm going to kind of point you to the different pieces because it's a little complicated. You see this top button flips the direction, so you can change your bus from inbound to outbound. This second button will open up one of these two modals depending on the direction you picked. And this is eventually, this is how you manipulate the list of stops that you're viewing on a bus. Good luck if you're headed towards Forest Hills. I don't know which Forest Hills to tell you to choose. It's bad. But it's not this team's fault necessarily. They didn't have this empathy. There's 170 bus routes with something like 900 different shapes that they can run. It's not possible for a human to kind of grok that. So it took a lot of time and a lot of empathy, but this is what we ended up with. So we kind of split those functions and made it more explicit how to change direction and gave it a label so that you could easily go from Back Bay to Forest Hills. When you board a bus, you don't see the phrase inbound or outbound. You just see the head sign, which is the Forest Hills or Back Bay part. So we re-emphasize that in the view. And then this is the thing that I had to push for. We did not have the data to do this at first, but I also asked our transit data team and our planning team, hey, can you give me customer-facing descriptions of each and every one of these 800, 600, 900 shapes? I don't know the exact number. And not only that, but can you tell me what is the typical nature of them? Which one is the most priority, which is one least priority, which has the most trips, and when do they run? So in this view, we've kind of put some priority and some order into how the bus runs. And we've created these descriptions. So, I mean, buses are complicated. I, from where I sit, can't make it less complicated. But I can tell you how and what those different complex things might do. What's great about this data is, like, we're public, so this is in our API now. It didn't exist before, but now any third party like Google can pull this in and help make sense of our system with us. All right, I'm gonna show you 2015. This is that same bus route in 2015, big table. And this works great for commuter rail, right? Because they have a really small list of stops. It doesn't work well on a bus route that has 85 different stops. It's extremely difficult to traverse on a screen reader. And just in general, it wasn't responsive. If you know what your bus stop is, you can maybe use this. But a lot of people, if you use the bus, it's a pole in the ground with a little yellow bus sign on it. It doesn't say what your cross streets are. You need a lot of other clues to know where you're standing. And so to their credit, the team who took this over did try and include a map. This is from the Wayback Machine, so the map is not showing, but it was here. And what we eventually did, and this is very iterative and it happened over the last 2 years, but we've completely changed how this looks and really, really, really deeply redesigned all parts of it. You can see here too, you couldn't see how the buses also connected to each other, but they're obviously a really interconnected system. And if you're not in a commuter-based mindset, you're thinking about how are people trip chaining? How are people getting from work to picking up their kids from daycare and then going home? These connections are really important to explain and show. But I'm talking about schedules. So I really want to show you what the bus schedule system, what we did to improve the bus scheduling appearance. So you saw that big timetable and you were looking at this going, where's the timetable? And to that I want to point your attention to this schedule finder in the top right. So in 2018, this was the equivalent feature. It was a different tab of the same view that had this mess of inputs. This opened up a calendar, this reversed the direction on the page, and this brought up a list of however many stops were on that page. If you were to interact with it, it would then produce this like mega 2-column list on desktop with some live departure times mixed in with the regular schedule. And from observing those sessions, like I said, we did before, and from looking at our analytics, we knew this was really difficult for people to get around. And I'm just going to quickly go, like, this is what we simplified it to. It's 2 inputs. What direction are you going? What's your origin stop? And from there, we split out the 2 kinds of schedules and reprioritized them according to people who need information immediately about what's coming up right now and people who are planning for the future. And for this view, I think we're now ready to talk about the kind of second bias that this team had to overcome. And I'm calling that the robot bias because I think it's cute. But what it is really is it's an engineering bias. And like I showed you earlier, this is how operations data describes the world. It's on a trip-by-trip and a day-by-day basis. It's like not the most excellent way of conveying information to the public because you don't really care what your bus driver is. You just care that you can get on a bus. And with that engineering bias, you know, it's easy to tell a robot, like, give me all the schedules that you have for like tomorrow or January 1st, 2019, and just dump out that list of everything that you know about that date. And while that's great and it worked, schedules should be predictable and repeatable events. Like that's the whole thought of what ought to happen. Let's give some order to that. But yeah, with the engineering bias, the first thing we did was, or the previous team did, was they built this enormous calendar picker. And calendar picker is great if you're sighted. Within 1 click, maybe you're able to pick your date. But if you're a blind user who's traversing this on a screen reader, that's as many as 31 different rectangles that you need to hear out before you can pick a date that you care about. So it was also not super humane, in addition to being kind of robotic. And the better way to present this was really just what we'd been doing for over a century, what we've been posting on those paper schedules, which is splitting things out by weekday, weekend, and holidays. And while this looks extremely simple, this is what that little picker looked like in that redesigned schedule finder. It's about 10 times more difficult with our data. This is what the first pass of this looked like, even with like a little cleaning up. It's this huge list of services. And what we wanted is what's on the right. I'm going to read out one of these. Under future schedules, you can see that there is a Tuesday to Wednesday schedule from November 26th to November 27th. Nobody wants that. And it took a lot of persistence to like muscle this into submission, because again, we're trying to do something that is good for humans, but maybe not as good for robots or computers. And this is what persistence and insistence look like if you're crazy. In this screenshot, you can see me apologizing for doing my job and trying to make this translation to our engineers about which things should be public-facing and which things should not be. And so yeah, that's the totality of the redesign. You can visit it on MBT.com today. And for my closing remarks, I just want to say, it took me a year at the T before I felt confident enough in my understanding of how service runs. Like, I'm not a transit nerd. I'm like a goth who designed pregnancy apps for women. But it took a lot of time to spend with this before I felt even confident challenging these engineers and challenging these other people who, again, had their own personal biases, whether they knew it or not, about how the system should be displayed and run. And all I really want to say is, if you're at somewhere really big that you really want to change, that you feel like there's some important work to be done, like, really hang in there. The last 100 years, the T has been the T. It's seemed like change has not been occurring. But as you saw in some of those other pieces or like glimpses of the other technology we're building, the last 10, even the last single year, have been exponential in terms of change. So we're a little late, but change is coming. That's all.
That was awesome. Do you want to take questions?
Sure. Don't boo me, please.
There should be get buttons out around. Oh, go ahead.
Hi. So I have a question about all the many transit apps that are out there. When I first moved out here a year ago and downloaded a bunch of them, was trying to obviously wait till I'm outside on a 20-degree morning and then figured out how to use them and where I'm going. Mm-hmm. And it just, it felt like they were all somehow flawed. One could show bus routes but couldn't like suggest an overall big picture route, or maybe another one had bus and subway times but not commuter times. And so my question for you is, I'm not beating up on transit, but I kept going back to Google Maps to figure out a route, and that seemed backwards to me. Like, shouldn't there be something that was Boston-based, that was more specific, more targeted? So my question for you is, if you were to wake up tomorrow and have to figure out on the public transit here to figure out where you're going and then monitor along the way, what would your process be? What app or combination of apps would you personally use to do that process?
Sure. I mean, all roads lead to Rome, right? They're all relying on kind of the same underlying data. And the good thing about the T is, like, we dog food, we use our own data that we produce, so we're always trying to refine it. Obviously, I'm biased, and I want people to use the app and give me feedback at customer support. It's on our website. I see everything. But it's in, yeah, my dream would be, obviously, if the T would have the resources to build our own internal mobile apps. But even Transit, which is our preferred partner, we have an open Slack channel, and we're talking to them all the time about how to use our data and improve it. Me personally, I use everything because I have to. I want to know how people are using what we make.
Thank you. Yeah, hi. That was really fantastic. Thank you for going through all the details there. I was curious, did you have a process for user testing and user feedback and trying different tactics and seeing how people absorb that information?
Yeah, we're a young department, so we've been trying a lot of different types of user testing. For what you saw, we did a lot of like acceptance testing with unmoderated tests where I'd sent out some tasks for users to complete, worked on like prototypes and live web pages. We are always listening to the signals and capturing metrics about how people are using the website live. We do not do A/B testing because we move at such a quick pace. Like we make all those changes so quickly, it's hard to use A/B testing to get that feedback. But yeah, we're testing all the time. And we also work with partners at the Institute for Human-Centered Design, which I recommend to all of you who need to do this work. And that's how we've tested the website with blind users, users with dyslexia and other kinds of impairments. So.
Hi, Ingrid. I love what you're doing. Could you talk a little bit about your switch to civic tech and what inspires you in that space?
Yeah, I can. So yeah, before the T, I was designing primarily mobile apps for women's health and livelihoods, and it was like really fantastic. It was exciting work. People loved what I built, which is great. People don't necessarily come to me with nice feedback these days. But it was one of those things that you stay in tech long enough, especially as a woman of color, your priorities change as you see the impacts of your products. And while it was wonderful for me to help like millions of women get pregnant using their mobile phone, that's amazing. I was looking always at like what are the bigger, meatier challenges? How can I help and impact more people? And that's really what it is. I don't think of it as civic tech. I still think I'm just like building cool tools, but yeah.
Well, thank you so much. All right, and now I'd like to invite Lisa Maria. So we'll get set up here. Ingrid, is this yours?
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Do you want to? You did great. With the marks. Okay. So there are 4 people we called in the raffle who weren't present. So I'm going to call the names one more time, and then if not, we'll redraw. The names are Kayla McCauley, Lana Ducharme, Rachel Weiheimer, Satya Adebala. Everything good so far?
Which one do I want? Do I want this one? Just plug in whatever one fits.
Oh. And then this just needs to be switched.
What is that?
HDMI. Right, so I'll just read the introduction.
Yeah, please.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us, Lisa Maria. Lisa Maria Marquis is an independent consultant based in Boston. She practices content-driven information architecture, helping organizations to understand, organize, and structure their web content for empowering user experiences. She's worked with clients and agencies such as MassMutual, Carnegie Mellon University, the Posse Foundation, Brain Traffic, and HappyCog. She's the author of Everyday Information Architecture. And you're probably familiar with A Book Apart. Lisa Maria is the managing editor of Book Apart, A Book Apart, a publisher of brief books for web professionals. Thank you.
Is this on?
The chart document did it.
Testing.
There's a
Testing.
switch at the top of the.
Probably. Turn it on. Aha!
There you go.
All right. Can everyone hear me? Yes. Fantastic. Hi. Dan, thank you so much for that introduction. I want to thank you and the World IA Day team for having me here today. This is really exciting for me. Thank you, all of you, for coming back after lunch and being here. Today, I'd like to talk about how we use categorization as an organizational structure on the web and the impact of our organizational choices on the people who use our websites. We're going to start by talking about this jerk. His name is Walter Plecker. In the 1920s, he was the registrar of Virginia's Bureau of Vital Statistics, which is a state government agency that controlled birth records, marriage licenses, etc. And he was the worst, like just really, really, really awful. An atrocious white supremacist, really bad. He was particularly terrified of interracial marriage. He believed, wait for it, that interracial marriage was only happening because of wrongful categorization. That's right. White people were marrying non-white people because the government hadn't labeled them correctly. He decided he was going to change that using the power of bureaucracy. He eliminated Virginia's racial categorization system, leaving just two categories. One very specific group got labeled white, and everyone who fell outside of Walter Plecker's narrow definition was not. And then a bunch of racist laws, because Virginia, ran wild with the results. Suddenly, thousands of Virginians' lives turned upside down. The government saw them differently and treated them differently. They no longer had access to the same public spaces, the same schools, the same services and safety nets that were afforded to white people. Marriages were invalidated. Children were separated from their parents. Indigenous people could no longer legally identify themselves. Virginians lost agency over who they were, all because Walter Plecker changed a label. Changing a label is a design decision, one calculated in this case to disenfranchise specific human beings. And I think most of us in here don't have Walter Plecker's job. We are designers, we are information architects, we are strategists. We build interfaces and products and apps. Our work helps people take the bus, read the news, order dinner. It seems kind of unthinkable that our work could carry the same weight as the Bureau of Vital Statistics. But of course, I'm standing here today to tell you that it does. We work on the web, and the entirety of human knowledge lives there. We control how people find and understand and use information in pretty much every facet of their lives. So that's an enormous amount of power and responsibility. Now, as information architects, I'm sure we're all pretty familiar with this Richard Saul Wurman quote. And it is such an important quote. It really is at the core of our work. Whenever we are organizing information, when we're categorizing it, arranging it, labeling it, connecting it, whatever we're doing with it, we're altering it. We're changing how that information is going to be perceived. And I think what we sometimes forget, though, is that our organizational decisions don't only have the power to create new information, they can also erase information. Or maybe this is a better word. Now, creative organization is a necessary and really wonderful thing, but we need to remember that it can be used for evil just as it is for good, which I think Abby pointed out in her talk this morning. If we're not thoughtful about our organizational choices and their potential impact, we risk causing harm. So, how do we make sure we're being thoughtful? How do we make sure that we are thinking through the unintended consequences of our categorization? Let's take a step back. When we talk about categorization, we're talking about a type of organization in which we create groupings based on shared characteristics. And this is pretty basic stuff, right? From a very young age, we're taught to do this. We're taught to identify patterns. We're taught to notice how things are similar or different from other things. It's a fundamental way of ordering and understanding the world around us. Take food, for instance. Very broad category. We have so many different ways of categorizing food. We have fruits and vegetables and meats and grains. We have breakfast foods and dinner foods and desserts and snacks. We consult cookbooks or recipe websites that might be organized according to season or main ingredient or flavor profile or country of origin, method of preparation, on and on. There are lots of ways of thinking about food categorically. And then there's grocery stores. Now, at a high level, grocery stores all follow the same general mental model, right? Different types of food get grouped together. We can be pretty confident that we'd find bananas next to apples and spinach, right? Produce is a fairly stable category that seems pretty easy to define. But that stability doesn't necessarily apply to all product categories, and many grocery stores differ in those details, right? So compare these categorical listings from Peapod and Wegmans. Some of these labels are really similar. Definitely, they both have a produce section. See, told you, nice and stable. But Wegmans has a category for meat and seafood, while Peapod splits those up into two separate categories. Peapod has a category for dairy, while Wegmans gets a lot more specific and labels one cheese. Wegmans also relies on just a few categories right there. It's a much smaller list, while Peapod seems to surface more aisle groupings up front. Now, who can tell me where to find the peanut butter? Crickets. Yeah, okay, so at Peapod, it is under condiments and sauces. Sure, why not? I mean, I don't think of peanut butter as a condiment, but that's just me. My local store, it's in the bread aisle. That's not even an option here, so there's already like a mismatch between my personal experience and what this website offers me. Where would we even begin with this Wegmans list? I just want some peanut butter. Oh, okay. My shopping feels very simplified, of course. Why not? Why? I'm already on a grocery store website. I'm 4 levels deep, and there's grocery. Okay. We're having a good time here. We're laughing. This is silly. This is a silly example, but my point here is that categorization is not actually as straightforward as we think it is, right? We're tricked into thinking that it's simple because we make categorical decisions like all day, every day. We keep our lettuce in the crisper with the other vegetables. We put our socks away in the drawer with the other socks. But the only reason that we're able to do those tasks efficiently, for personal definitions of efficient, of course, is because each of us intrinsically knows what we mean when we say vegetables or when we say socks. We have our own private definitions, and so we automatically look for the qualities that match those definitions. And this process is known as criteria matching. We're doing it all the time. We just don't necessarily realize it. It's what we're doing anytime we're trying to decide if something is like something else. And it can be really tricky to articulate, which I'm sure all of you know if you've ever engaged in the infamous argument of whether or not a hot dog is a sandwich, or whether or not a 38-year-old counts as a millennial. These are the big questions of our era. Deciding if something is like something else is a process of drawing boundaries, of deciding what to include and what to exclude. And that makes it a process that's fraught with subjectivity and mistakes and politics and bias and cultural expectations. It's not as straightforward as it seems at first. But it is something that we can break down and articulate. To understand criteria matching, we have to understand 2 things. First, what are the criteria? What defines the category? How do we know what the category means? So we're going to talk through an example here. I like cake. What is cake? We all like cake. Let's talk about cake. How do you define cake? And I want to hear from you guys. Tell me what cake is. What is cake?
Baked good.
Baked good. All right, hang on. Let's go with that. Baked good. That's one. I heard someone say sugar. Did someone say sugar? It's sweet. We'll say that. It's a baked good and it's sweet. Are there any other things that help us understand what cake is? Dessert. Okay, so we put a context around it for like when we eat it or what meal it's served at. Pretty good. Do we want anything else?
Glutinous.
Glutinous? Did I hear glutinous? Whew, that's going to make this next part real tricky if we go with that, but okay. All right, we're going to stick with just 4 because we can't remember that many more. So we've got a baked good that's sweet, that is dessert, and is glutinous. Can you all hold on to that? Yeah? Hold on to that for me. Okay. Second question we have to answer. Does the content match the criteria? We've established our criteria. We know what cake is. We've all agreed. We're all in agreement on this definition of cake. So now we start by evaluating individual pieces of content to determine whether it fits the category, right? Whether it fits these 4 criteria. So let's go. Carrot cake with white chocolate frosting. Is this cake? Yes. All right, yeah, I gave you an easy one, right? It is sweet. It is for dessert. I mean, I would argue you could eat it for breakfast, but that might just be me. It's dessert, it's probably glutinous, and it's a baked good. So we're working there. That's great. How about this one? Margarita cupcakes. Does that still meet all 4 criteria? Yeah. Now we didn't specify size. So I just want to make sure we're still okay if cupcakes count. That's fine. If they're tiny, it's still cake? All right, cool. This one. Yes? It still fits those 4 criteria. Still fits. It's a different shape than the other cakes. It is sweet, though it doesn't quite have as much frosting. I think we would still eat it for dessert. Put some frosting on it, maybe. How about this? Oreo ice cream cake. No. Wow. Really strong opinions. I mean, I will say it's hard to tell from this picture whether there is in fact a layer of baked cake underneath that or whether it's all ice cream. I'm not actually sure. That might make a difference though, right? Like if we say there's a layer of baked cake there, then it still counts as a baked good, and then it's just ice cream on top. But if it's all ice cream, we're going to say no, it doesn't count? Okay. All right. Custard cake? I don't even know what this is. but I will point out that it does have a crumbly layer of cake batter at the bottom, but it's mostly dairy, right? Like this. So, and it's, I don't know, I don't think that's glutinous, guys. I don't think that's glutinous. Does this count? It says cake in the title. It's labeled cake. The cake is a lie, you're right. Last one. Cheesecake. It says cake in the title. It's not glutinous, that's for sure.
It's a pie.
Do we want to include cheesecake in our definition of cake? Do we broaden our definition in order to incorporate this? Or do we change our definition to keep it out? I'm hearing no. I'm hearing keep it out. I'm hearing exclude the cheesecake. Ban the cheesecake. It's your guys' categories, not mine. All right. So what just happened here? When we first defined cake, we established our criteria, right? We drew lines. We decided what would be included and what would be excluded by that term. Now, we did that before we saw this stuff. If we'd seen this ahead of time, we might have changed our minds on stuff. We talked through these pieces. We evaluated each piece of content against that criteria, and we argued about our decisions, right? And we talked about whether we wanted to include these things in the criteria or whether we wanted to change the criteria. And that's exactly what we're supposed to do. Criteria matching is a back and forth process. You want to make a rule, test the rule, tweak the rule, right? It's really good to reevaluate and redraw those boundaries. It means we're able to better articulate why we're making the decisions we're making, which means we're more likely to be making good decisions. So. Here's the thing. Cake is very easy. Cake is a low-stakes example that I came up with after spending too much time on Pinterest. In the real world, not everything is cake, and we have to categorize much more complicated things. So what happens if we try to categorize, go with me here, the people in this room? We're more complicated than cake, right? So let's do some exercises here. Let's try something out. Let's categorize ourselves according to astrological sign, because that's nice and easy criteria. Everyone who's a Pisces, please raise your hand. Happy birthday. Everyone who's a Capricorn, raise your hand. Cool, cool, cool. Everyone who's a Scorpio, raise your hand. Oh, we're mysterious and beautiful, I know. Okay, super fun, nice and easy. Let's try another one. Let's categorize ourselves according to the type of company we work for. How many people here work for an agency? Raise your hand if you work at an agency. Cool, cool, cool. How many people work at a nonprofit? Cool. How many people work at a university? Yeah, cool, cool, cool. How many people work for themselves? Yeah, damn the man, save the empire. Super, super fun. Now let's do salary. Raise your hand if you make less than. Whoa, that got awkward super fast. And I think I'd get a similar reaction if I asked us to categorize ourselves according to marital status, or health conditions, or religious beliefs. All of a sudden, it wasn't this easy breezy exercise. All of a sudden, it got kind of awkward. Everyone was like, I guess I'll laugh nervously. You might be reluctant to self-identify with those questions. You might be reluctant to raise your hand. And I think you would reasonably ask me why. Why am I asking that? What are you going to do once you find out how I identify with those things? There was all this vulnerability suddenly. There was anxiety, there was discomfort. Because we're never talking about just information. We're talking about ourselves, right? We're talking about human lives. That's us. So let's take a step back again, this time to the 18th century. I'm going to talk about our friend Carl Linnaeus, Swedish scientist responsible for biological classification system, right? Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, or as I learned it, King Philip came over from Germany singing. If you have any middle school mnemonics you want to share with me, see me afterwards. Biological taxonomy is one of the most important and impactful classification systems ever created, right? And it certainly helps set the standards for taxonomies ever since. Now, as you might imagine, in order to invent all of taxonomy, Carl Linnaeus had to take a lot of notes, like so many notes. So many notes. And most scholars at the time took their notes in books, right? Which makes sense. Books are great for writing things down. They have one tiny problem. The information inside them is fixed, okay? You can't move ideas around. You can't swap pages. You can't shuffle concepts. Once your ideas are written down in a bunch of bound pages, that's it. That's where they live forever. So books aren't necessarily ideal for managing information that changes over time, like we see with criteria matching. So, sorry, I shouldn't be so mean to Carl. Linnaeus hated that he couldn't move his notes around. He started writing on smaller, separate slips of paper that could be rearranged to accommodate new information, and voila, something that eventually became the index card was born. Now, and this is totally true. This is totally true. Now, the power of index cards comes from their ability to juxtapose information and thus create new information. Remember our quote from Richard Saul Wurman earlier. Index cards were better than books at managing research notes and tracking records and standardizing and structuring small bits of data. So it's really no coincidence that soon after Linnaeus, European governments began standardizing their birth certificates and their marriage certificates, and paper money showed up, and libraries started using card catalogs. All this good stuff happened. But whenever we find a helpful tool in human history, we usually also find a weapon. Once Europeans recognized how easy it was to categorize plants and animals with index cards, they decided to categorize people too. And really bad things happened. In a 2017 article in The Atlantic, Daniela Bley reported, as soon as anthropologists applied Linnaeus's taxonomical system to humans, the category of race, together with the ideology of racism, was born. Nazi ideologues compiled a deadlier index card database to classify 500,000 Jewish Germans according to racial and genetic background. Other regimes have employed similar methods, relying on the index card's simplicity and versatility to catalog enemies, real and imagined. The act of organizing information, even notes about plants, is never neutral or objective. So if you take away nothing else from our chat today, that, okay, that. It doesn't matter if we're talking about groceries or cake or personal identity. If we assume that categorizing information is simple, if we act like it's neutral, if we treat it as a trivial task that's just standing in the way of some other cooler part of building a website, that's where we run into trouble. We risk exclusion. We risk perpetuating unjust structures. We risk harm. So back to how not to do that. Back to our work on the web. When do we encounter opportunities for categorization online? Where do we see categories popping up in our digital experiences? And the answer is frankly everywhere. Let me go through a few quick examples. We see it a lot in media, right? Anytime we're listing movies, television shows, music, podcasts, we're going to see a whole bunch of categories pop up. Yep, great. Netflix is a very easy example. I'm sure we're all pretty familiar with this screen and the way they like to group things together based on the fact that you watched something or can't stop watching British cop dramas. Another one we see it often in is e-commerce, retail, etc. Zappos is just chock full of categories. My goodness, first, we've got that section of categories, women, men, kids, etc. That's their top level navigation. Within that, they break it down further. So we've got shoes, clothing, etc. The shoes get broken down into additional categories, heels, clogs, flats, loafers, etc. And even the stuff that they're promoting on the side, athleisure, Birkenstock, categories. My gosh, there's so many. Let's look at a local example here. The news, right? Publications, journalism, anything that's generating a ton of content, we're gonna see categories. Here at the top, we've got some traditional newspaper section categories like metro, sports, business, opinion. But they also use categories for these trending topics here, where I assume if I clicked, I would get a bunch of articles about Tom Brady, a bunch of articles about impeachment. So they're using categories in two separate ways. And of course, back to Pinterest. Social media and creative platforms have a lot of categories on them as well. This one is showing how I keep my cheesecakes organized separately under my desserts category. I have a lot of recipes on Pinterest, like a lot. So categories are everywhere. They are everywhere in pretty much every digital experience, which means you are always working with them. Maybe you're listing products or grouping materials. Maybe you're developing a sitemap and trying to section out the content. Maybe you're building a taxonomy or a controlled vocabulary. You're likely practicing categorization in multiple contexts, even within the same product or site experience. And this certainly isn't a complete list. It's just a few of the more immediate contexts that came to mind. Now, no matter which contexts your categories appear in, they have two very important roles to play. The first is that they communicate all sorts of clues for how users should think about your content. The way you choose to organize and label content can tell users about the scope of that content, the relationship between different pieces of content, the hierarchy of information on that page or across the site as a whole. Your categories tell users whether they're going to find what they need on your site. Done right, they should tell them exactly where to find the peanut butter. Fingers crossed. Listen, I didn't know I was going to be speaking after someone from the MBTA. So, no offense, Ingrid. This is up here for a good reason. So let's just using this as an example. What do we know about the content inside this site just by looking at this little bit on the homepage? What can you tell me? Like, what do we learn from these categories? What do we know? There's many what? Many transportation options. Yes, okay, we've got a couple here. We've got subways, we got buses, we got commuter rail, lots of things there. So that's great. We can see all that information right there from categories. What else do we know about this website? Tools? What about tools?
Maps, alerts, finance.
Yeah, okay, there's a bunch of support tools up at the top, right? Things that can sort of make it easier for you to use the site. One might argue that there's like a certain amount of self-awareness about some of the challenges that come with navigating this system. Alerts is nice and big up there. Yeah, absolutely. There's like a lot of information here. There's a lot of sense of support, sense of ready to help you kind of stuff going on. Now, if we scroll down further on the page, because there's a bunch of stuff that happens after this, but if we go all the way to the very bottom, we're met with this. More categories. Yes. So we learn here that there's a whole bunch of other stuff. There's information on accessibility, there's information on the leadership, there's information on careers, and it's all so important that it's at the bottom. I'm sorry, Ingrid, that's it. It's all at the bottom, important, but not as important as the stuff up here. So we're already, before we even dive into this website, we're already learning a little bit about the content that's available to us here on this site. Let's look at another example. I like to use the local stuff. Going back to the Boston Globe, here's the first 4 sections on this website, and now the next 4, and then the last 6. There's just so many, you guys. There's so many. All of these labels. The thing with this many labels and the way they're arranged all in a row, is that they are all elevated to the same level of importance and context, right? Rhode Island becomes conceptually equivalent with sports and business, but different from metro, not the same metro area. Heaven forbid. Marijuana, conceptually equivalent with like magazine and cars. It's just a little odd, right? As users, we're sort of told just by seeing this that the content that's here is it's all on the same level, right? There's a kind of parity, even though we know, looking at them, that doesn't exactly make sense. That doesn't totally match. And anyway, there's too many of them for us to really wrap our head around the whole picture of the content on this site. Now, sometimes overwhelming people with content is what we want. Does anyone recognize this? Anyone? Ravelry, yeah, hell yeah. This is a website called Ravelry. It's an online community for knitters and crocheters. And this is, what do we learn about the content by looking at this?
We want everything.
We want everything. Yeah, this tells us that this content, there's just a ton of it. There's a ton of it, and it's super detailed. It's very extensive. It's very user-driven. This much faceting is just amazing. It's very specific. It's very granular. It's very cool. If you are new to knitting or crochet and you go to this might be too much. This might not be okay to look at. But luckily, this is actually the advanced search option. There's a much, much simpler, less scary set of search parameters. But if you are an advanced knitter, if you are someone who is really into this world, you look at this and you are jazzed. You are like, hell yeah, I'm going to find exactly what I'm looking for. So I think we can see from this example that we're not just getting clues about the content, we're also starting to get clues about the user, right? Which brings us to my next point, which is that categories also tell your users what you think about them. The language that you use, the hierarchies you establish, the scope of your categories. These are all bits of data that reveal who you think is using or should be using your site. So let's look at Cannondale.com. They make bicycles. What does this company think about their users? I hear laughter. Is it this? Are you laughing because of this? Because I'm laughing because of this. Apparently, women are a separate category of users. There's no category for men, so I assume that all the other categories are for men. This website thinks that its users are men, and specifically bad boys and hooligans. That's what I take. I mean, I'm not a cyclist, but I really don't want to shop here. I don't like them. I don't like it. Do better, Cannondale. Categories. All right, let's look at this website. This is Harney and Sons. They make tea. They make really good tea. Really good tea. Now, I know this is too small to read, so without reading it, you take anything from this? Anything at all?
Black tea.
There's a lot of black tea. Yeah, there's a lot of black tea. This is 9 categories of black tea. And I'll share with you, it's all black teas, flavored black teas, Assam black teas, black tea blends, Ceylon black teas. Okay, it keeps going. Let me zoom in on one of them. This is teas from other regions. It's the last one. Nowadays, tea is coming from more than the usual suspects. Please explore these teas from Africa, Indonesia, southern India, and Vietnam. So, does this tell you anything about who they think their users are? What are they expecting their users to know when they come to this site? Yeah, who the usual suspects are, right? Listen, I buy tea from these people. I love their tea. I don't know what the hell they're talking about. I am so out of my depth with this because I'm a casual tea drinker. I know that I like black tea, but I don't know where the tea I like comes from. I don't know if it's Assam or Ceylon or Darjeeling. I don't know who the usual suspects are, and I don't know why Africa, Indonesia, southern India, and Vietnam are segregated into this other category. This is telling me that they expect their users are experts at tea. They expect their users are coming in with a lot of tea knowledge and that they know exactly what they want before they get to this website. This is not a site built for browsing. This is not a site built for discovery. This is a site built for, I know what kind of tea I want, it's very fancy, and I'm not wasting time. All right, this is from a website for the Association for Writers and Writing Programs, abbreviated AWP. It is a question on a membership profile form that people can fill out if they belong to this association. I will read it to you. It says, gender. This demographic information will never be displayed in your online profile or in the online conference schedule. Gender information is only used in the aggregate to help AWP report to our funders and membership, and it may be released when a representative sample is achieved. This information is not used as part of the proposal process and is not shared with the subcommittee. Then it says gender. Select all that apply. And it has some check boxes. female, male, agender, androgynous, bigender, cisgender, gender fluid, genderqueer, intersex, non-binary, transsexual, transgender, two-spirit, a gender not identified here. What does this company think about their users? Colorful. Diverse, right? Might be a better way of saying that. There's a variety of them. They feel strongly about their identity. They are very specific about their identity. They want to identify accurately using the words they want to use. There's a lot of options here. And they're checkboxes, not radio buttons, right? So you can have whatever mix you want. And crucially, I really think this is kind of the key part. This isn't required. This organization is not foisting this on anyone. They're not requiring anyone to fill this information out. Not filling this out has no bearing. It doesn't change any of their standing in the organization. They don't lose out on any opportunities. And they also know that transparency matters. This is a group of people that really cares that their identity is protected, that their information will be protected. So having this information out there along with this very elaborate system of categorization, amazing, really fantastic. So good job. So examples are one thing, but how do we actually do this? Right? How do we do this work? What are we doing when we sit down to create categories for our products or our services or our sitemaps or our search systems? What's guiding our thought process? I think there are 4 factors to take into account whenever you start to build categories. The first is obviously the content itself. That's your primary source of information. It tells you what's missing. It tells you what's not necessary, what's working well, what's not working as well. And you learn that information through a content audit and other discovery activities. That forms the foundation of your organizational decision making, right? You have to start with what you have. And the content will sort of lend itself to some initial natural groupings. Now, from that starting point, the business goals come in. They start to add some color, right? What is it that your company is trying to accomplish? Why is this product or experience or website being built? I think really the best way to say this is, how's the money getting made, right? Because you're working in a capitalist system, so that bottom line is going to influence your categories and labels one way or another. What systems of categorization are going to enhance the business? And are those systems in conflict with our next criteria, the needs of the users, right? This is the one I think most of us spend a lot of time on. We're trying to focus on that. We're in user experience. So what do people need? What mental models do they use? What language and labels will be familiar to them? How can our categories give them what they want quickly and efficiently and effectively? User needs and business goals are these sort of twinned set of factors that get a lot of attention. But lately we're starting to hear more about this other factor, this last factor, and that is, how can our choices benefit the community? What is the impact on the world at large? Because design decisions can certainly meet user needs and business goals while still having a deeply negative impact on society. Facebook. Sorry. But if we can incorporate the question of greater impact into our categorization decisions, into all our decisions, right, we can start to build better systems. In the real world of technology, Ursula Franklin calls for redemptive technologies, technologies that are driven by their impact on people, on society, on the natural environment. How do we build technologies that promote justice? How do we build technologies that right wrongs? How do we build technologies that uplift the human condition? How do we use our work to protect community and climate? Designer Erica Hall argues for a similar approach in her article, Thinking in Triplicate, which borrows the concept of the triple bottom line from economics. The triple bottom line suggests that a company's profit and loss isn't an accurate measurement of the company's value. To truly capture value, you have to consider its social impact and its environmental impact. Only by lining up all 3 things, profit, people, and planet, can we gauge the true bottom line. Shockingly, this idea has not really caught on with most companies, real weird, but it is certainly an idea that I hope will catch on with us. I think it's an idea we can try to incorporate in our own work on the web. Or as Erica put it, we need to design products and services that make their users better off, make money, and don't fuck up society or the planet. She puts things very, very succinctly, I think. Now, this is a tall order, but I think we can start small. Start with the categorization of information, a tiny thing that you can influence with your work. How can your categorical systems advance the greater good? I want to look at a few examples that start to head in that direction. This is the homepage for the nonprofit Legal Services of Northern California. Now, what's the first thing that jumps out at you on this page? What grabs your eye?
I need legal help.
I need legal help with, yes, the text. Anything else? Icons, big, bright, colorful, like the main color on the page, center of the home page. Yeah, absolutely. They draw your eye. They each represent a content category, a topic of legal assistance that this organization can provide for their clients. And I think they could have made different choices, right? They could have easily have decided that these categories were going to be a drop-down from the main menu, or they could have treated them as a text sidebar, or they could have put them in a carousel, all of which would still have met user needs and business goals, right? Certainly other organizations in their position, I've seen them, would use this primo real estate here to put up, news, message from the director, glossy hero photos, testimonials, right? Stuff that makes the organization look good. But Legal Services of Northern California uses this space instead to display categories and to shorten that distance between landing on the homepage and actually getting help. Another example, Patagonia. You guys are familiar with them, I'm sure. This is a lot of white space because they use a lot of white space, but also I'm super zoomed in here. What's happened is I've clicked on Inside Patagonia, and this is a drop down that appears. What I love about this design is that they only have two categories in the main navigation, Shop and Inside Patagonia. What that categorical decision says to me is that the information about their mission, the information that we see inside Patagonia, their activism, their environmental and social responsibility, is exactly as important to them as their sales. Other retailers display their top-level product categories, right? We saw that on Zappos.com. They take the mission information and they put it in the footer, or they put it in a utility navigation, or they put it in our history, or they put it in About Us, somewhere else that's clearly less important than like the shopping is what matters. So by condensing their entire catalog into a single category and putting it on equal footing with that mission, they're sending a really different message, one that I think is much more in line with that triple bottom line approach. I also love the example set by clothing company Universal Standard. This is an item sold on their site. What I want you to look at is the categories for sizing. I'll kind of blow that up a little bit. So this is really different from other retail sites, really different. First of all, the range of sizes runs from size 00 to size 40. So contrast that with typical women's clothing retails, which offer like a 2 to a 16 maybe, so really different range of sizes. And second, they've recontextualized those sizes by labeling the middle size in that range, 18 to 20, that's their medium. And then they just adjust the sizes out from that center point, rather than starting with the smallest number and sizing up from there. So the result is a much more progressive and inclusive way of looking at sizing and improving the shopping experience. Now, they did this because they say on their website, if 67% of women in the US wear a size 14 or above, why were their options so dismal? It was clear that all women weren't given the same level of style, quality, or even respect. We wanted a size 40 to shop in the same way as a size 00, using style as her only filter, and we wanted to be the ones to make that happen. So by changing their size category labels, they've advanced the conversation of inclusion and body diversity, using the same sizing as every other retailer would have met business goals and user needs, but it wouldn't have had the same social impact. One more example. Last fall, the racial justice organization Color of Change launched a campaign asking wedding planning websites to stop promoting former slave plantations as wedding venues. As they put it, you have a multi-million-dollar industry that makes money off of glorifying sites of human rights atrocities. One site, Brides, responded by immediately pulling plantations from their feature articles and vendor list. They're just gone. I did this search myself yesterday just to make sure. That's what you get. They said in a statement, Brides is an inclusive place where everyone can feel celebrated. Content glorifying plantations is not in line with our core values. Now, in order for brides to be so successful in this effort, two things had to happen. First, they had to recognize that plantation or plantation wedding was a category, right? Something they could define, something they could criteria match. But second, they had to want to act on that definition. They had to make a decision, an active choice, to change the way they and their users interact with that category. They took a stance. They recognized that this category is not neutral. Now, let's contrast this with the Knot's response to Color of Change's request. They decided not to remove plantations from their site. They have promised to revisit the language that they used to promote those venues. Language like paradise, breathtaking, sophisticated. Clearly, they have not revisited the language yet. How about the phrase, "The landscape boasts a rich history and culture"? I wonder what history they think they're referring to. The Knot has argued, even if we remove these venues from our marketplace, they of course still exist and will continue to operate and potentially still market themselves using language that is insensitive to the history of plantations, which doesn't solve the problem. Color of Change didn't ask them to solve the problem of plantations existing. Color of Change asked them to take one small step in the right direction. One step toward reducing harm to users, one change in categorization. We can make small changes because our categorical choices have consequences. They impact our users and our communities in good ways and bad. Every decision we make about how to present information, how to structure it, how to design it, how to categorize it, will ultimately change it. So let's make sure we're changing it for the better. Thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you. I'm going to step in front of the camera. Would you like to take questions
We're
or?
on time, so let's just skip it.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you again. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
And I can't wait to rewatch the video for all the great details and case studies. Jason, do I need to call any more names for the raffle?
You should already have the alternate list. I didn't get a response from the other.
Okay. I'm going to call 4 new names for the raffle, and then I'll introduce Eniola. Okay. The names are Tom Garayapi, Tamara Zenkovich, Elsa Van Hove, and Evelyn Lay. Yep, right over here. All right, and our final speaker is Eniola Oluwole. Is everything working with the?
Yeah.
Take your time. So Eniola is the Chief Strategy Officer at Villiers. He has over 20 years of experience in digital strategy, human-centered design, and product creation. He's partnered with organizations across a variety of industries, including healthcare, financial services, consumer goods, and B2B technology, by developing their teams to solve experience design and marketing challenges. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. So we're at the home stretch. We've got about 45 minutes to go. So thank you for those that have come here in the morning or come here in the afternoon and stayed till now. I'm going to start with a story that hopefully a lot of you are familiar with. This story starts as a UX professional. You're working with your team or working with your organization. You've created whatever it is that you're creating. So if you're an information architect, you're creating a taxonomy or a navigation. If you're a UX designer, you're creating a UI. If you're a UX copywriter, you're creating some copy. And you've brought it to either the individuals that you're working with or the team, so they might be a developer or a project manager or even a CEO. And for whatever reason, they're not having it. You've put in some time doing some user research, looking at landscape analysis to see what other like businesses or like users are doing. And for whatever reason, they don't buy into the process, research, effort that you've put into that UX deliverable. And potentially you've gone back and said, hey, you know what I need to do as a UX professional? I need to educate them. So you've gone back, you've got some additional research, or you've brought in some cognitive science theories, and you try again, and they're still not buying it. And then ultimately you've left with the feeling of, I've tried for the user, but they're not really either caring about what I do as a profession, they're not really caring about the user. So how many people, maybe in the last 3 to 5 years, have felt that feeling or had that experience? A good amount of us. So that's what I call a narrative. There are a lot of narratives like that. Oops.
Sorry, it's the...
It does not.
Oh. Sorry about that. I should have seen it before.
End the show and try it again.
There we go.
Sweet. So the fact that we can all relate to that story means that it's a shared narrative. It's an experience that we've all had, that we can all empathize with, and because we're all faced with many of the same situations and challenges, we can all relate to it. And what I've realized over my 20 years is that I've had a lot of those same narratives myself, and those narratives are around other people not caring about user experience, or me not having the right amount of time that I needed to solve for a user experience problem. Those things keep happening from when I started as a visual designer, as I went into an information architecture role, as I've gone into a UX strategist role, and now that I'm managing teams. And now that I'm managing teams, I'm starting to see that I'm not the only one that is having that experience. The people that I'm managing are also having those issues. I would say about once a week, I interview someone, and one of the questions I ask are, how do you manage conflict when you're trying to communicate your user experience point of view? And usually what they'll say is what I said before, is that they say that, hey, I did some research, I try to talk to them about the principles of UX, and very rarely are they really successful. They have to have really concrete evidence, or at least given the opportunity to do that user experience research. More frequently, I have what I call interventions, which is someone comes into my office or I'm in a meeting and there's a very clear friction point between a user experience professional and somebody else on the team. And really what happens at that point is them as a user experience professional are trying to make their case for the UX, and that other person isn't really buying it. And then they come back to my office and we talk it out, and they feel that, hey, I'm not being heard, I'm in an inequitable situation around user experience. So coming into World IA Day, I thought about, if we're all sort of feeling this way, and they're all shared experiences, why are these things happening? So I did some research. I also did a lot of interviews, both with people that are non-managers and people that are managers. I also put out a hiring manager survey to understand, why are these things happening? So I settled down on 3 of those narratives. And I will say that the ones I've highlighted are the 3 ones that are the most false, or have as much untruth to them as they are symptoms of things that feel like truths, but when you dig deeper, they aren't really what they seem to be. So today we're going to talk about why those things happen and what we can do to change them. We're going to talk about the lies that we tell ourselves. So the first lie is the narrative of the hot profession. So this one is not something that we always speak out loud. It's something that we think. If you're coming into UX from a side profession, maybe you're a teacher or something else, or you're still in school, it's something that a professor might say to you is, UX is really, really hot right now, and it is the UX profession that you need to get into. That seems very, very true. UX has spiked from 2011 till now. There's been an exponential growth in the number of UX jobs. UX used to be relegated to user experience or information architecture or human factor, websites or magazines. And now it is common business terminology. If you go to Forbes, Fast Company, even the news, you're going to see people talking about UX, where people talk about how they can grow their business and how they can influence users in order to increase their bottom line. User experience as a profession is one that we all love. I love working in UX. It's awesome. I've never once regretted going into this profession. And research says that user experience professionals are 17 times more likely to love UX than to hate it. And because of all these things, we have General Assembly and Career Foundry and Springboard and all these other alternative educational schools rising up to meet that demand, where you can get a user experience certification in as little as 8 to 16 weeks. And of course, as much of you know, you get called by recruiters. I've changed 2 jobs in the last probably 6 years. And in between probably a week of me arriving at my new job, I've had multiple recruiters who, knowing I've gone to this new job, call me and say, hey, I have another job available, and whatever you're making, we can give you more. And that's very true. UX as a profession is paid very well, especially right now. On Glassdoor's ranking of top jobs, being a UX manager ranks number 18. The only jobs that are higher, or only professions that are higher, are being a developer or being a healthcare professional such as a doctor or a ER nurse. But the truth of all that is that although it is a really hot profession to get into, you're not going to get a lot of help once you're in it. So why is that? So one reason is about 75% of people that work in UX teams either work as a team of one, so they work alone, or they work in a UX team that doesn't report into a UX manager. So there's not really someone there in that organization, a lot of times or very frequently, that can sort of guide you, give you coaching, give you feedback, point you in the right direction. Many times you're sort of hired to do the thing that you're supposed to be able to do, and you're left to your own devices. The number one cause of UX dissatisfaction that is reported is a lack of education or support systems within that organization or within their organizations. So once people get into UX roles, there isn't really a foundation or program to develop your skills. In some other organizations, say the medical field, there's a concept of continuing education credits and ongoing education and training. That doesn't really exist in user experience as of yet. If you want to get better at UX, you have to really do it yourself, or be at awesome places like this today. Interestingly enough, 75% of UX managers right now find it very difficult or difficult to hire UX professionals. I'm one. Every single job I've had over the last 5 years, I've started with open recs, and I continue to still have open recs. And it's continuously hard and difficult to hire. But the number of people that are looking for UX jobs continues to grow. So why is that? Why do we have that mismatch or that imbalance? So putting out a survey, I asked hiring managers, how do you feel about that? Why do you think is the cause that we are not able to fill these empty roles? And generally what they said is that there are more jobs than there are good talent. So that sort of speaks to the idea that, hey, we have more jobs than we have people, and then the people looking for those jobs aren't really qualified, so they all suck. And really what hiring managers mean when you sort of scrape a little bit deeper to get to the reason why, what they actually say is what we're really looking for are more senior and more experienced people. And what we're getting are more of those people that are coming out of those programs out of school. If you talk to recruiters, and again, as a hiring manager, my company's hiring, by the way, I talk to them quite frequently, and they'll second that idea that there's a shortage of user experience professionals in the marketplace. So the people that have been working for a while are already working, and they're contacted by recruiters to go to new jobs, and the problems that we're seeing nowadays are more complex in terms of user experience. It's not the sort of 2000s where people were still designing with tables and having really crappy UX. Nowadays, UX is in our cars, it's in our microwaves, it's in our TVs, it's on our Alexa that's spying on us. The UX experiences that we're creating are more complex. And because they're more complex, we need people that have experience solving those complex problems. So what we've seen before is that T-shape, when we were looking for professionals, was really broad in terms of the breadth of knowledge and really deep in the depth of understanding. And what we're seeing more frequently when we're looking at hires is that has shrunk. And it's not that people suck, as I was saying before, it's just that people are earlier on in their careers, right? That's natural. I just got out of college or I just got out of a program. I don't have that breadth of knowledge and I don't have that depth of understanding. So how do we go and change from that narrative of UX as a profession to go into and add on to it, and you should actively build your career, especially for those people getting out of programs? Well, first off, as a manager, I believe that a manager has an obligation to develop their team. Part of the challenge right now with people trying to fill those UX roles is that a lot of managers are people that are also new to managing. So they don't necessarily have that experience to give the right coaching or guidance to the people on their teams. So talking to more experienced managers, what they say that they look for when they're hiring people are communication. And this is something that probably a lot of you already know. Because there are multiple people coming into the workforce, into UX, and multiple people filling out UX roles, and the working environment for UX is more complex, communication is a key skill. So what they mean by communication is being able to clearly articulate the work that you produce. We're talking to more people in order to create UX, and being able to talk across other people that aren't UX is really, really important. There's also that ability to storytell, to be able to sell the idea, because there are lots of ideas that are going on in how we're creating UX right now. So being able to tell a story and a narrative, if you will, around how that idea is going to change the experience for the user is really important. The next one is critical thinking. Many people say that, hey, I want more people on my team that can think critically, but there's not really a good definition of what that means. So talking about critical thinking with hiring managers to get a really good definition is critical thinking is really about how to talk about what you did, which I think we all have a grasp of doing, but not necessarily why we did it. And I think that's the harder thing, being able to link the what we did with why. And why starts with some of that user research, but why is also how we think it's going to solve the problem of the user. It's also about problem framing. So being able to break down the initial ask and understand what problem are we really trying to solve. A lot of times, work starts with a very functional request. It's like, hey, make a button, make an interstitial, add this thing in the navigation. But critical thinking is being able to stop and say, why am I doing that, and how is that solving for what problem? The last piece is usability and human factors. So talking to hiring managers, what they're seeing now is that there is a gap in interaction and usability skills. And again, some of this is natural because there's not this depth of experience in thinking about usability and human factors, and they haven't been exposed to years of research. And also a basic understanding of user-centered design techniques. And if we're able to demonstrate these things, especially for those that are coming out of programs or transferring in from other organizations, we're then seeing those people as superstars. We're seeing them as people that we want to invest time in, people that we want to develop, and then people we want to seek training in. The next piece for people that are thinking about how do I develop myself in UX is around the idea of finding a mentor or coach. So semantics aside, mentor and a coach are kind of the same. When I've talked to people about mentoring and coaching before, it wasn't really clear what the difference is. But for the sake of this conversation, we'll say that a mentor is someone like Mr. Miyagi, where they're really good at that technical thing that they do. And what you're doing with them is you're learning from their experience doing that thing, and you're modeling their behavior. A coach is someone that not necessarily might be teaching you how to do that thing, but they're giving you advice and perspective on your career, the work you're doing, how to interact with people. Sometimes your coach and your mentor are the same person, sometimes they're very different, but being able to identify those two people to support you in developing your career and skill set is really important. So once you identify that you need a coach or a mentor, the next thing is like, well, how do you find one? So one great way is through networking through events like this, right? So being able to network at lunch or meet after a conversation is a great way to find people that can fill that mentor or coach role. Another one is after you sort of made that introduction, either at an event like this or potentially through your own existing work, is to have a goal and define the type of relationship you want with them. Is it a relationship where you want them to give you an advice on sort of a new choice you want to make in your career, or how you want to approach a stakeholder in your organization around a new project? Again, emphasizing the idea that you can have more than one. I have multiple coaches and multiple mentors, and they all solve for different gaps that I have in my skill set. And finally, and most importantly, just ask. What I found most frequently when people come to my office and they say, hey, I have this really problem, or I need some advice, they say they've been thinking about it for a really, really long time. And the thing I always say is, why didn't you just ask? Most often than not, if you reach out to someone that you already know, that you have a relationship with, and you say, hey, I need some either coaching in terms of how to interact with other people within my organization to get my idea across, or I need some coaching in terms of some technical skill or process, most often than not, they're going to say, sure, I'd love to help. But the number one barrier for people to get mentors or coaches is their inability to ask and reach out. So the truth of the hot profession is you won't get much help building your career, but if you focus on communication, critical thinking, usability skills, you're going to be sought out as someone that is a UX expert. And you're going to have people that want to invest more time in developing your skill set and your capability. And if you can find a mentor or coach, they're going to give you the perspective and the in-depth training or learning on your technical skills in order to get there. So that was the first lie. There are two more under the theme. That one was really more for people that are transferring into UX or trying to grow into their career. This next one is probably more so universal. It's the narrative or the lie of the us versus them. It's usually expressed by a conversation after an incident with a peer that you work with, where you say, that person or that team or that role doesn't really care about the user. And afterwards, you go back to your desk, you're sitting there, you're pissed. You spent all this time and effort building this UX case, whether it's for your project or for an aspect of work that you're doing, and you're frustrated, and you're like, man, how can they not care about the user as much as I care about the user? And the reason why we feel that way is we, as UX professionals, we define ourselves as the defender of the user. More often than not, users aren't sitting in our organizations or sitting in our offices very frequently. Even if we bring in people for user testing, very few organizations actually have an ongoing user testing cycle where people are always downstairs or in the office that we can talk to. So very often, we are the people that are representing what the user feels, what the user needs. And because we do that, when we don't get support for what the user needs, we take it very personally. So looking at some more research, when you ask user experience professionals what are the major reasons that they feel that are blocking the success of their teams today, you'll find a range of items. But when you look at the range of items, what you'll see is that the majority of these are really around feelings of inequity. So there's a lack of UX support, there's a lack of UX influence, there's a lack of a UX mindset that's shared in an organization. Very small amount of these issues are around budget or time. It's around really the feeling of, as a UX professional, I'm not being heard, or more specifically, I'm the only one that's making a trade-off. And by extension, it also means that the users are the only ones that are making trade-offs as well. The truth is, though, is that everyone is thinking about the user experience. So earlier on, I talked about how UX is now thought out as a big influencer in business. So you have project managers. You also have CEOs that feel that over the course of the last 12 months that UX will be a key differentiator, I should say, for their business. So if everyone is thinking about UX, what are some of the reasons why that keeps happening? If 64% of the teams that exist in the organizations, or UX teams that exist in organizations, have a user-centered design process or a UX manager that owns sort of UX, why do we still feel that we're the ones that are making trade-offs? If UX exists in ideation with design thinking that is now more so seen in organizations than not, in strategy, in design, and development, why do we still feel this way? So 3 main reasons why this happens is a lot of UX activities start with functional requirements. Someone comes in and says, hey, we need to build X. Not a lot of why we need to build X or who we need to build X for. We just need to build X. Another reason is even if we do have a good user-centered reason for creating something, or more often than not, we find that the only measure of success is a business metric for success. And the last issue is around the idea of goal misalignment. So to talk a little bit about goal misalignment, I'm going to use the analogy of the pig and the chicken. So I didn't know about the analogy of the pig and the chicken. It sounds like you know the analogy of the pig and the chicken. But I got this analogy when I was asking project managers and developers separately both use this analogy. And the analogy is a pig and a chicken decide to open a breakfast restaurant. And the chicken goes, hey, this restaurant's going to be great. People are going to come in, we're going to serve eggs, and we're going to serve bacon, and it's going to be great. And the pig says, whoa, wait, hold on. If we do that, I'm super committed to this thing, and you're just involved, so I need to slow down. And that's generally some of the sentiment that happens when we're creating as user experience professionals. There's a misalignment of goals, and teams feel that they have other commitments that user experience is not necessarily thinking about or considering. If you look at project managers or business owners, they do care about the user experience. And for the UX, they want people to come back. They want them to have experiences that they felt that were successful, because if they come back, that means that we're able to increase what they're responsible for from a business perspective, which is profitability. If more users come back, we're going to make more money. So they have a vested interest in caring about user needs and also retention. But they have a commitment to the business of being profitable. If the business is not profitable, they're not going to have a job. For an engineering perspective, they want to create experiences that are enabled by the platforms that they build. A lot of that also comes from a point of pride. As a developer, I'm actually building this thing. If I can take advantage of the features on this mobile device or on this touch screen and see users use it, they're using something that I built. But from a business perspective, they're responsible for making sure that thing that they built is fast and responsive. They want to make sure that it's scalable and you can build more things on top of it fairly easily. And also that there's not a backlog of tickets and we can get product out into the market really fast. If they're not able to do these things as developers, they're not going to be able to keep their job. So there's a lot of misalignment that happens when working with user experience professionals. As user experience professionals, even the lone wolves that work alone within the organization as the sole UX person, our user goals and our business goals are highly aligned. There's not a lot of conflict or weighing decisions that we need to make. From a user perspective, we want the user to feel like they have a usable experience. We want it to feel delightful. We want them to love it. From a business perspective, we're hard because someone somewhere said, hey, we want users to have a preference for our thing that we're creating. And we want them to be satisfied. Those things are highly aligned and correlated. So it's really easy for us to think through challenges from a user's perspective and not have to worry about business considerations because our business considerations are very close to our user considerations. So how do we change from that narrative of they don't care about the user to how do we solve for all our goals? Because if they also want to solve for the user and we also want to solve for the business, how do we get there together? So the first way is around goal alignment. And a great way to do that is around having shared measures. So all the things we talked about before in terms of what a user needs and what a user experience professional wants to provide for that user, and then all the things that a business needs and what a user experience professional needs to provide for the business, we take that for all the stakeholders involved in creating what the experience is. And in more advanced companies, you can create a balanced scorecard and say, hey, we're going to actually list out all the things that we're committed to. We're going to track them. And if we run into issues, it's really clear where we're running into those issues. But because we've put them out on the board, we can now have a really clear conversation of how it's affecting each and one of our goals. At less mature organizations, just having the conversation around, hey, what are your commitments and what are your goals, helps get everybody aligned as to what we're trying to do together. So when things hit the fan and you have that meeting where you walked in, you presented your thing, and someone was not having it, so to speak, you can then ask them, what is your objection? And it allows you to get a little bit deeper into what their objection was, instead of just saying, I don't like it, to be able to say, hey, I think this thing is going to go a little bit slower from a development standpoint. And then you can have a conversation of, well, how can we sort of meet that sort of commitment you have, at the same time meet some of the commitments we have from the user's perspective. So if you have alignment, sometimes you get out of alignment. And then you have to realign. So a technique you can do or use is called the power of questions. And the power of questions goes like this. My pet peeve that usually kicks off when someone isn't having it in the UX world is somebody wants a button somewhere, and they want to make that button bigger. There's no real reason why they want the button bigger. They just feel like making the button bigger is going to get more people to click on it. So the first thing you want to do is you don't want to say, why do you want to make the button bigger? You want to say, why do we want to make the button bigger? Because if you say we, you're already starting out being very inclusive, and you're not putting blame on the other person or the other team. So you start off with, why do we want to make the button bigger, or what are you trying to do? And by saying that, you allow them to reframe their ask. And you give them a little bit of time to think about, hey, what am I really asking this person to do? But sometimes that doesn't work, and they still say, I want the button bigger. And you say, why do you want to make the button bigger? And they'll tell you something like, well, I want more clicks. And then you say, well, why do we want more clicks? And then they'll say something like, well, I want people to register. And then you say, well, why would people register? Why would they? And then that gives the person the ability to now think about, well, why would someone register on their site or our site? And then they start talking about, well, they'd register because our product solves this problem that they have. Or they'd want to register so they can get updates on XYZ. And then you can say, well, why don't we do that? What's blocking us from doing that technique or showing that information or allowing the user to do those things? And the idea there is you're just peeling back layers of the onion, walking them back from that initial very functional task that they came to you with, and allowing them to sort of ideate with you around what the problem is, what the options are, and how we can support the needs of the user. So you got alignment, you went out of alignment, you had some realignment. Sometimes you're fully aligned and what you're lacking is empathy. So the other person understands what your goals are for whatever reason. They just feel really strongly that they need to make it very profitable, or they feel really strongly that it is not efficient enough from a development standpoint, and that's what they need to get into the experience. So what you need to do there is build empathy, get them to care about the effect that some of the decisions that we're making have on the user. One way to do that is through role play. So role play is a great technique for getting people to put themselves in somebody else's shoes. And the role play approach is about focusing on the user journey at hand. And you want to invite the person into that role play experience. The reason why you want to invite them is that there's a little bit of hokey nature to it. So you can't just jump into saying, hey, role play with me. Cold turkey. You kind of have to say, hey, I think we're at a position where I'm feeling something about this experience, and my concern is it's going to affect the user in this particular way. So why don't we actually walk through what the user experience is together, and maybe we can sort of understand each other's perspective. So you want to assign roles and say, hey, you play the role of the user, and we'll walk through this experience together. And as they're doing that, you want them to play act the interaction. So a great example is someone wanted to add a pop-up or interstitial to the website, and I used this role play technique. And I said, why don't you walk through the experience of, a user is coming from another shopping site and they come to our site. Why don't you tell me, what they see and how you experience it? And the person will talk through, yes, I come to the home page, I scan the site, this interstitial that we built will come up, I click register, and I go in. And then you sort of question them and say, when you go to other sites, you click on all the other interstitials that you see. And they'll say, well, no, if it's really good, yeah. But I'm like, well, all right, so you didn't directly come to our site, though. You came through Google to our site, so our site wasn't your main objective. When you go to sites like that, do you click on those interstitials? So you're getting them to sort of really think through, from a user's perspective, the types of experiences they're going to have, and getting them to empathize, from a user's perspective, how the decisions will affect them. So in the narrative of us versus them, really everyone is thinking about the user experience. A way to sort of get them back onto thinking about the user experience, because sometimes they might get off it, is to have shared measures between your group. So if you all have a balanced scorecard, at least the same vocabulary to talk about what your various commitments are, you're able to have more effective conversations about what your goals could be that are shared together. You can use the power of questions to sort of peel people back from a very sort of functional or task-based request to being able to ideate with you around what possible solution might be. And then also you can use the active role-playing to sort of build empathy with stakeholders or partners that are either really focused on their other commitments or not really thinking at hand around the impact the experiences you're creating or having on your users. So the last narrative is the narrative of dominating focus. Oftentimes, this is internalized as, I'm really focused on this aspect of user experience. This is generally not something that people actively say or think aloud, but it's something that you've probably noticed in yourself or your peers. Either someone's really focused on design thinking, or they're really focused on a new tool that came out, or they're really focused on, say, interaction design. And the challenge with that is that although those things are really great, sometimes there's an over-focus that brings them off of user experience and onto those things. So user experience has been growing exponentially, not just in the amount of people, but in our professionalism and our ability to execute. So we expanded on our design-centered processes. So we're using design thinking, we're using lean UX, we're applying growth hacking to various teams and using the MVP framework to create product faster. In terms of best practices, people are now having design systems when they create products and experiences. For various platforms, there's now material design for people creating on those platforms to give them guidelines and references in terms of how to create. There are new platforms where mobile device was the hot thing 3 years ago. We now have a Tesla that has basically a TV in the front seat. We have refrigerators with LCD screens where you can order food from your local Walgreens or Wegmans and have it delivered to your house. And I mentioned before, we now have specialized tools to solve for the various aspects of the creation of UX. The truth is, though, that with all this growth in UX, there's an overall decrease in the focus on experience usability. And why is that? Well, one reason is UX has become more and more specialized. When I started around UX, there was really just information architecture. Really, it was visual design / webmaster, then information architecture, and now we've splintered into various roles within user experience. I actually think that's okay, and that's actually great, because in larger teams or with more complex problems, you want people with specialized skill sets and deeper skill sets in order to solve for very specific problems. A challenge, though, is what is defined as good UX has changed. Right? So good UX now is about having engaging ideas. It's about bringing things faster to the market. It's about having more entertainment and delight into the experiences that you're creating. But what it's less about is having an effective product for your end goal. It's less about being error-free, easy to use, or easy to understand. Those things are still things we talk about, but when we work with stakeholders or are evaluated as UX professionals, people care less about those things. What they're looking for is the engagement with their consumer and the end user. So here is how do we get balance, right? So all those things are important. And all those things actually do make great products. But how do we get balance? How do we get balance between our UX goals that are key to our role as a UX professional, but also the goals in terms of what our products need to do for our businesses? So the first thing is around recognizing some of the traps that we might fall into. So the process trap is replacing the goals we might have from a UX professional with the goals of the processes that we use, right? So design thinking, MVP framework, growth hacking. Design thinking is really about collaborative design and ideation. MVP and growth hacking are really about how do we get quick iterations with sort of less thought into what we put into them, but by iterating quickly, we can sort of test live. Those aren't about the roles or the duties that we have or the commitments we have as a UX professional, right? So the goal here is we need to untangle our process goals from our goals as a user and being cognizant about if we're using a process, what that goal of that process is, versus once we're done using that process, what we still need to do as user experience professionals. There are system traps, right? So the system trap is where passively using patterns and toolkits instead of thinking about cognitive science and research when we're creating. Patterns and toolkits are great. They speed up the process. They make sure that we're designing and thinking consistently. But if we're designing and thinking more so with our gut and not thinking about why we're using those patterns, there's a challenge, right? So when you're designing or you're creating, think about, hey, the last set of decisions I made, did I do that with my gut or did I do that with the research and the cognitive science that I have in my head or I have at my disposal? How do we go to actively using research, cognitive science, and behavioral science that many of the other speakers today have talked about? And the last one is around how do we recognize the tool trap? And the tool trap is manifested by measuring the worth that we have as user experience professionals by the tools we use. I see this displayed in multiple ways, but two key ways are, information architects that spend a lot of time creating really high fidelity wireframes, right? They spend potentially, half an hour creating the perfect line height to go into their wireframe, the perfect assortment of grays. Having good deliverables are great, and having people buy into UX is great by having really good deliverables. But ultimately, a user is not going to be using that wireframe. So we need to be cognizant of, are we spending the right amount of time in creating that deliverable for the end purpose of the end goal? Another one is interactive design. So there's a lot of effort put into making experiences that we create engaging, fun, and delightful. But are we making it so engaging, fun, and delightful that it actually gets in the way of understanding what that application or experience is supposed to do, and reducing the user experience or usability of that experience as well? So in order to gain tool balance, we need to assign value based on the impact that we bring to those experiences versus the tools that we use. And the reason why that's so important is because if we're not able to do those things, if we're not able to drive back to balance, we become known as meeting facilitators. The people that are called in just to sort of facilitate the design thinking workshop or the discovery session and then go. We're known as the wireframe monkeys, which was the word that was used way back in the day that's slowly coming back by user experience professionals that just make wireframes, but don't really think through or use enough research to justify why those wireframes exist. We become known as survey makers. So the research people that are called in to run the survey versus the research people that are brought in to give us perspective, to keep us honest, to give an additional voice as to what they've heard from the user. And then finally, we're known as the people that are good with color, right? So we're not being brought in for our expertise in terms of color theory or the interpretation of brand or user values and how good design and layout can help influence the experience. We're brought in because I know as a stakeholder that I don't really know how to use Photoshop or Sketch, and this person does, so that's why I need to hire that person. So when we think about the truth of dominating focus, we need to realize that we're focusing a little bit less on overall usability. We need to untangle our process with our job as our role. We need to actively use research and usability science, and we need to measure our value by the impact that we bring to our experiences. In 2020 and beyond, key takeaways from this talk are actively build your career. You're not going to get much help, especially if you don't ask, but a lot of it is on you. Think about how you can solve for all your team's goals, and think about the processes you can use to enable your team to solve with you. And then ask yourself, are you focusing on something else at the expense of the user experience? And then finally, how can we go from the lies that we tell ourselves to the truths that we can tell each other? Thank you.
That was awesome. Thank you. Would you like to take
Sure.
a couple questions? Does anyone have a question?
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. That was really wonderful. I think one of the things that came to mind for lie number 2 was around privilege and rank when it comes to, say, especially in the agency world, speaking with clients. So one of the things I struggled with when I was, just starting out in UX, like more like 2008, 2010, was more like not having the opportunity really to speak to the stakeholders or clients about some of those high-level questions to get to the heart of the matter. So what would be your advice to younger designers and people in that position where they want to ask those questions, but how do you bring it to the boss or the senior director or whoever that is actually talking to the client?
So I think this is where critical thinking comes in. I think the reason why more senior level people in an organization separate the more junior level people in an organization is that they feel that, hey, this person's not ready, or this person's going to ask the wrong type of question to the client, right? And I think if you're able to demonstrate critical thinking that, hey, my questions are valuable because I'm thinking about not just what I'm doing, but the why I'm doing it, and my question's based on, hey, there's still a why that isn't answered, then I think those are the types of questions that people are more than willing to ask because they understand that it drives forward the success of the project, right? So I think you can still have that intermediary, but I think you can still get your question asked by saying, hey, here's a question I have, here's how I think it affects the success of the project. Is this something you can answer? And if you can't, is this something that you can ask the client? And I think if you're able to do that successfully, and especially over time, then they're more than open to sort of open the doors for you to ask that question directly.
One more.
Thank you. Hi. So you, in the beginning of the talk, kind of talked about the current job market, and there's sort of a mismatch between what hiring managers are looking for and what current talent pool kind of has to offer. And on that topic, what are the top three things, or however many you can think of, that you would look for in, I guess, junior UX professionals? Whether it has to be educational background, is it their side projects, is it their certificates, is it their interview process, all those things.
So it's definitely the communication, critical thinking, and usability skills. And I think it's how you demonstrate that you have those things, right? So most people screen people out through their portfolio. And I think once you are able to sort of get through that hurdle, or I should say have those things in your portfolio that demonstrate that you're thinking critically about the work you're doing, right? So if you just have an image of, say, a navigation project or a website project without really a good articulation of why you did this, then it doesn't really demonstrate critical thinking. I think how you sort of tell that story is a good illustration of your communication skills, written communication skills. And I think how you talk about how you applied usability research or usability science to that portfolio sort of demonstrates your usability skills. So that sort of gets you in the sort of first step of actually being in front of the hiring manager. I think when you're in front of the hiring manager, it's really just continuing on that foundation that you've already laid, right? It's being able to talk about the work that you've done in that way that sort of illustrates the fact that you're thinking both about how do you technically execute the work, but also why you did it, and the understanding the impact that it had for the business or the client and also the user.
Right, thank you.
No problem. One more?
Sure, one more. Last one. And then I'm just going to make a couple quick announcements.
Hi, Tom Root. Thank you. That was really insightful and extremely helpful. Are your slides going to be available somewhere?
Yep.
And excuse me, the whole day has also been recorded.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Cool.
Thanks. All right, thank you so much, Eniola. A couple, don't go yet. Promise I'll make it quick. Thank you again to Ingrid, Lisa, Maria, and Eniola for this afternoon. These are all really wonderful. I learned so much, and I'm going to have to rewatch them. So a couple things. As soon as that comes back up. So I'm going to read two final names for the raffle. One is Daniel Beadle. The other is Andrew Nelson. So if either of you are here, come meet Jason up at the front. Someone also left a notebook here with Wayfair on the front. So if this is yours or you know whose it is, please come to me afterwards. There we go. Okay. A few to-dos. We will email this out tomorrow, but some are time sensitive, so feel free to take a photo of this. Bunch of surveys. First is a feedback survey for this event. We would really like to hear your feedback, hear what went well and what we can do better or differently next year. Second one is the global survey. This includes a feedback survey, card sort, the discounts from the global sponsors, and drawings from global sponsors. Third one is a separate drawing for the free Euro IA ticket. I believe that ends today. And fourth one, I have no idea what it is, but there's some kind of super secret prize. If you can answer the question, what is the secret of the IA element? And the World IA Day Twitter feed has some hints. No idea what that means. And finally, keep the conversation going. So stay in touch with the people you met today. Stay in touch with World IA Day. Revisit the talks. Use the ideas that you heard about today. Please help clean up. Take anything with you. There's a trash can back there. Thanks to Dan Beadle for making arrangements for an after party at Beat Brew Hall in Harvard Square right now. A few upcoming events to be aware of. I'll let you read this. I won't go through all of them. And again, I just want to plug the Academics and Practitioners Roundtable on Values in Information Architecture. It sounds might sound a little intimidating, but it's academics and practitioners. It's for everyone. This is always a really interesting day. And the rest of the IA conference is one of, in my opinion, the best conference. And a few others coming up in the near future. Thank you again to all of you for joining us today. Thank you to those who joined us online. Thank you to the volunteers, helpers, sponsors, the 12 speakers today, Jason and Ebe for organizing, all of our family members. Thanks again to Russell University for helping us with the live stream and making that possible. Again, check out their in-person and online programs. CVS Health, Northeastern University, Huddle, Last Call Media, Matt Powell, and ClearPoint. Thank you to our global sponsors. Thank you, everyone. And see you next year on February 27th.